Yes, come on in. You're just in time for our next lesson, right? So today we're going to be taking a look at a rather charming Pokemon, I would say, and one that is known for its heart-shaped nose and its ultrasonic calls, amongst other things, right? Now, let me show you the Pokemon that we bring in today. He's gonna come in, flying in, and look at him. It's Swoobat. 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 Here he is. Now, however though, as we always do in class, right, we have to begin with its earlier stage, right? Swoobat is a Pokemon that has already evolved once. And in order to fully learn about this Pokemon, we have to first look at its pre-evolution, right? The Pokemon that evolves into Swoobat. So, before we talk about this little Swoobat over here, we need to look at its pre-evolution. And that one is known as Woobat. 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 Now, Woobat is a psychic and flying type Pokemon, and it is officially known as the Bat Pokemon. The Bat Pokemon. Now, Woobat itself is quite a small Pokemon. The average Woobat is said to be at around 40 centimeters tall, or about 1 foot and 4 inches, and it weighs around 2.1 kilograms, or 4.6 pounds. And that makes it a very, very light Pokemon, which obviously explains how it can flutter through caves very easily, and also how I'm able to hold it like this as well, without, it being very heavy on me. Now, visually, Woobat has a very distinctive sort of body, I would say. As you can see, its body is quite round and covered in this soft blue fur that Swoobat over here has a bit on its belly. It has small wings that allows it to glide and maneuver through the air. But of course, I would argue that the feature that you notice almost immediately, is the large pink heart-shaped nose that it has, right? Now, this heart-shaped nose is not only for decoration, right? Woobat can actually emit ultrasonic waves from its nose in order to understand its surroundings. And it will use these sound waves as a kind of echolocation, which is something which is relatively common with bat Pokemon, right? And other Pokemon that maybe need there's other senses. Maybe they don't have a great sense of sight, so they need to be aware of their surroundings in other ways, right? So they emit these sound waves, and then the waves will bounce off objects, off walls around it, and this allows Woobat to navigate in the dark, such as I said, the caves or even dense forests that Woobat tends to inhabit. Now, interestingly, when Woobat presses its nose against a surface, right, like this, it can sometimes leave behind a heart-shaped mark. In several regions, these marks are believed to bring good luck to the person who finds them. So, for example, if someone is exploring a cave and they see a tiny heart-shaped mark on the wall, for example, there's a good chance that a Woobat sweet. But as I said, that obviously is an indicator that a Woobat or a Swoobat came along and was in that cave or that area, you know. Now, as you can imagine, Woobats will prefer environments where their echolocation abilities are most useful, right? So as I said, they're going to be most commonly found in caves, forests, or generally, you know, dark locations. They seem to thrive in like dark locations like that with low visibility. In the region where you would argue that Woobat and Swoobat are most abundant, where you can see them more often, is the Unova region, right? Some places where Woobat are most commonly seen, for example, there's a cave near the Pinwheel Forest known as Wellspring Cave, and this type of environment is exactly what Woobat likes and what it needs to thrive. You know, it has dim lighting, a lot of rocky walls for its sound waves to bounce off of, and a lot of space to fly. You know, it is a flying type Pokemon. It does have wings. It moves by flying. So obviously it's going to want a big space where it can fly. There are a lot of other caves throughout the Unova region where Woobat seem to inhabit, including, you know, Mistralton Cave, Chargestone Cave, and Twist Mountain, just to name a few. And in case you're interested, you know, they are not only found in the Unova region. In fact, they've been seen in a lot of cave systems in a lot of regions. For example, in the Kalos region, there's a lot of Swoobats that have been appearing in the Reflection Cave. And in the Galar region, you know, in the Galar mines, there have been a lot of sightings of Swoobats because, once again, it is an environment that is a cave, which allows Woobat or Swoobat to use their echolocation to fly around, and it's just a very comfortable and nice environment for them. Now, Woobat is often observed resting upside down within caves. Again, this is a trait that is quite common to bat-like Pokemon. You know, it clings gently to surfaces while remaining still and conserving its energy in the dark environment. And now, despite living in caves, right, Woobat is not known to be a particularly aggressive Pokemon. I know that there's this like misconception that like, oh, caves are dark and scary, so the Pokemon that live in there must be dark and scary as well. But this is not the case with Woobat, right? In fact, it is a Pokemon that tends to avoid conflict whenever possible. It likes to rely on its agility and keen sense of awareness, I guess, to stay out of danger. And speaking of this like non-aggression, right? What is really interesting about Woobat is the way that it evolves, right? Many Pokemon, as you know, evolve by gaining experience through battling, for example, or by, you know, giving them a specific stone, a specific item. But Woobat evolves in a different way. It evolves through friendship, which I think is really nice. So, in order for a Woobat to evolve into a Swoobat, it needs to form a strong bond with its trainer, right? It needs to feel trust, companionship, love. You know, it's very important. And when it has enough love, essentially, right, it will evolve into this beautiful little Pokemon known as Swoobat. 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 Now, Swoobat is also a psychic and flying type Pokemon, so it keeps the same typing as its pre-evolution, Woobat. However, instead of being the bat Pokemon, it is now known as the courting Pokemon. And I think this name kind of fits the theme of its evolution very nicely as well. Obviously, it is still a bat, you can see by its wings and, you know, bat-like body and behavior. larger and more sort of streamlined, Its wings grow a lot wider and more powerful, and it allows it to fly with greater speed and control, right? Now, get ready for this part, right? The average Swoobat actually stands at about 0.9 meters tall, or 2 feet and 11 inches, and weighs around 10.5 kilograms, or 23.1 pounds. Now, as you can see, that is a lot larger than this little Swoobat that we have with us here today, right? 90 centimeters is a lot bigger. It's like half of me. So, what happened here? Well, this is what is known as an XXS specimen, right? An extra small specimen. One that happens to be, much smaller than the average Swoobat. As you know, Pokemon may vary quite a bit in size, and it appears that this one over here is just a lot smaller than the average Swoobat. I think it was a Woobat, and it was basically this size, and when it evolved, it forgot to grow. It just stayed the same compact little size after evolving. But I love him just as much. Anyways, let's move on, right? So, biologically, Swoobat builds up on a lot of the abilities that Woobat already had. Its heart-shaped nose is still the center of its sensory system, right? And it continues to emit these ultrasonic waves in order to navigate its environment, However, these waves are now much stronger than those of Woobat. It's even stated that the ultrasonic waves alone are actually strong enough to shatter rocks, which is quite powerful. Even more interesting, there has been some Pokédex records that suggest that these waves can actually affect emotions, right? So people who come in contact with waves produced by Swoobat are often reported to feel happier or more positive afterwards. There are still ongoing studies about this, so you can believe it. I choose to believe it because I really believe that Pokemon are all here to give us love and affection. So I believe that usually, you would feel happier after being in contact with a Swoobat. But this may also explain why this Pokemon is associated with affection and friendship, and also obviously the heart-shaped nose really helps as well. And if you turn around, it has a little tail over here, which it actually can use to hang from surfaces. So say for example it is hanging like this from a cave, it can use its tail to grab on maybe to a tree branch. I know that's not in a cave, but it likes to live in forest as well. Maybe from a tree branch, from anywhere in a cave that it can hang on, it can hang on like this, and it can rest, or it can, whenever it needs to take a break, that's where it goes. So they are usually seen quite often hanging upside down, just like Woobat, but from its little tail, while it's resting, making sure that it is securely stuck, I guess, if you want to say it, and that it is high up and away from potential dangers that it could encounter while it is resting. Now, I keep mentioning caves, but obviously Swoobat, just like Woobat, is found in caves, obviously. Again, Mistralton Cave, Twist Mountain, classic places where you would find a Swoobat as well. Now, I say we go and talk about its moves, right? And unfortunately, as much as I'm wiggling its feet here, I don't think it can learn any kicking moves. So, Woobat and Swoobat actually have a very interesting move pool, right? Woobat can actually learn Confusion quite early on, which is, your classic psychic type move that uses its psychic powers, to attack the enemy, basically. And it also learns Gust, which it can do by, moving its wings to create, bursts of wind to attack as well. But I believe that the one move that many trainers will associate with Woobat is actually the move Heart Stamp. Heart Stamp. Now, Heart Stamp is a psychic type move where the Pokemon will do a quick strike using its, well, in Swoobat's case, its heart-shaped nose. There's actually a bunch of other Pokemon that can learn this move as well, but Swoobat will do it with its heart-shaped nose. So it will go like pow, it may look kind of cute, especially when I did it, but it is a move that can actually be quite effective in battle. It actually has a quite high chance to stun the opponent to make them flinch, which is quite good. Another unusual move that it can learn is actually known as Synchro Noise. Now, Synchro Noise is a really interesting move because it only affects Pokemon that share a type with the user. So, in Swoobat's case, since Swoobat is a psychic and flying type Pokemon, if Swoobat was to use the move Synchro Noise, it would only affect other Pokemon that are psychic or flying. I know, it's a bit strange, but it's a very unique move, so I thought it'd be interesting to at least mention it. It's a bit of a niche move, but I thought it'd be, an interesting mention as well. Speaking of other moves, it naturally learns a bunch of moves, such as Psychic, Future Sight, which is a nice psychic type move. It learns Air Cutter, Air Slash. It even learns Assurance, which is a dark type move, and a normal type move in Endeavor. However, when it comes to TMs, Woobat gets a lot of moves from different types that it can learn. So we're going to do one from each type, as always, right? So, for example, right, as a bug type move, it can learn U-turn, which allows it to strike an opponent and immediately switch out. Dark type moves, for example, it can learn Thief, so it can steal your item, well, your opponent's item in this case. Electric type moves, it can learn Thunder Wave, which is really nice because it can paralyze the opponent. From fairy type moves, it can use Charm, which obviously its little nose is very charming, and this will obviously lower the opponent's attack. From fire type moves, it can actually learn just one, and that is Heat Wave, which is a really powerful move, Heat Wave, it will use a very powerful Heat Wave. Then from flying type moves, it obviously can learn even more through TMs, such as Air Slash, which will send, sharp blades of air toward its opponent. Air Slash, Air Slash. And they can even learn a Ghost type move in Shadow Ball and a Grass type move in Energy Ball. When looking at normal type moves, it even gets access to Hyper Beam, which is crazy because Hyper Beam is a very strong move, and Swoobat can learn it. Then it can even learn a poison type move in Venom Drench. Venom Drench. And obviously it can learn a lot of more psychic type moves, such as I already said, Psychic or Zen Headbutt, which are pretty powerful moves. And it can even learn a Steel type move in Steel Wing. Obviously it has wings, it can make it be Steel Wings. And funnily enough, it can also learn the water type move Rain Dance, which would make it so it starts raining on the battlefield, right? Which is like a bit of an interesting move for Swoobat to learn. Another particularly interesting move that it learns is the move Calm Mind. It is a Pokemon that can remain calm and use Calm Mind in order to increase both its special attack and its special defense. And this will become become important in a second when we look at Swoobat's abilities, okay? And speaking of the abilities, let's look at them. So, let's sit you down here. Swoobat can actually have 3 different abilities, right? The first one is called unaware. Unaware. So you're not aware. Now what this ability does, it is not that the Pokemon has no idea what's going on, but kind of, it basically allows the Pokemon to ignore stat changes in its opponent. So, for example, say the opponent is using Sword Stance and it's increasing its attack a lot, or Iron Defense and it's increasing its defense a lot, right? Swoobat will ignore those stat changes. So, no matter if it uses Sword Stance to increase its attack, the damage that Swoobat will receive from that attack will remain the same, which is wonderful. You know, it means you cannot have like a super strong someone spamming Dragon Dance or Sword Stance or something, and then it's like going crazy on you, because it will not matter to Swoobat over here. Now the second ability, right, I would argue is not very good, and it is called Clutch. Clutch. Now this ability prevents Swoobat from using the effects of a held item. So basically, if you give it a held item, Swoobat cannot use it. He's a little bit ditzy, he's a little bit silly, I guess, and he cannot use this item. So, that is arguably the worst of the abilities. But then, there is the third ability, known as its hidden ability, right? And that ability is called Simple. Simple. Swoobat is a simple Pokemon, and this ability could even be considered its semi-signature ability, I guess, since, you know, Swoobat and Woobat are some of the only Pokemon that actually learn it. The only other 3 Pokemon that get this ability are the Bidoof line, so Bidoof and Bibarel, and then specifically Numel. I know, specifically Numel, when it evolves, it cannot have this ability anymore. Specifically, Numel can get this ability. So, what does Simple do? Simple doubles the effects of stat changes on Swoobat. So, for example, as I said, right, Swoobat learns Calm Mind to increase its special attack and special defense. So, if Swoobat has Simple and it uses Calm Mind, instead of increasing its special attack and special defense once, it will increase it twice. So it's basically, I guess, like it used the move twice, you know, which is pretty powerful. With the right strategy, that combination can make Swoobat a surprisingly dangerous Pokemon in battle. So as you can see, despite its like cute little appearance, you know, it has a heart, it's a very happy Pokemon, bit silly. It is capable of becoming quite a powerful Pokemon under the right circumstances. So, even though it is a Pokemon that likes to avoid conflict and, you know, just do its own thing, it can become a strong Pokemon under the right circumstances or the right training, you know. So, I think that when we look at Swoobat's evolutionary line, it becomes quite clear that Woobat and Swoobat have a theme of like connection, emotion, and companionship, you know, because it evolved through friendship. And I think it is a Pokemon that likes to spread positive vibes, you know, through the ultrasonic waves it emits. As I said, people feel more positive after being affected by the ultrasonic waves, which I think is a very, very good sign, you know, of a Pokemon that is clearly being friendly with everyone and, you know, leaving a positive impact. So, you know, while they might be like these small cave-dwelling pets, I think that they represent something a lot bigger, you know. The fact that it evolved through friendship again it shows this idea of like companionship, and this idea that, like, you know, even if they live in little caves and dark spaces, it shows that, not all these Pokemon that live in these types of environments have to be aggressive or not friendly towards humans or anyone, I guess. And yeah, that is one of the things that I really like about this Pokemon, and hopefully you'll be able to appreciate Woobat and Swoobat a little bit more. And I mean, just look at him. Isn't he great? He's so fluffy. But yes, I think that will be everything for today's class. And I think that will be everything for Swoobat. As always, be kind to people, okay? Be a good friend. Be there for someone. And who knows, you might evolve as a person as well. I'm sure you will. So, thank you so much for coming to class. And I hope I will see you for another